good afternoon and a good evening to our panelists and all webinar participants joining us globally. I was just informed we have 800 plus participants across 30 countries registered for this global corporate governance webinar. This unique corporate governance panel discussion on the topic, the new 101 in corporate governance, is organized by BoardPAC and the Chartered Governance Institute. The president Chartered Governance Institute, John himself, shared his regrets for not making today's webinar due to a pre-scheduled meeting and wanted me to share this message. I welcome this initiative and I'm sending my apologies that I cannot attend. I would have loved to be a part of it and I hope it goes well. With that, let me quickly introduce the panel, which consists of leading governance professionals across multiple countries, live now to discuss the new norm in corporate governance post-COVID-19. We have Bentley, President of the Chartered Governance Institute, Sri Lanka. We have Megan Motto, Chief Executive Officer of the Governance Institute of Australia. We have Ashish Garg, President, Institute of Company Secretaries of India. We have Ndema, Director, MNA, Attorneys, INC from South Africa. We have Mary Garg, Group Company Secretary of GuocoLand, Singapore. And we will also have my Company Secretary of Bank, Simfana National, Malaysia. And myself, Sarath Perera, Global Market Manager for BoardPAC, the moderator. With the interest of the audience, we will not read the profiles of the panelists to maximize your time. However, feel free to browse them on LinkedIn. We will have a 15-minute at the end of this session. So let's kickstart this panel with Peter. Post-COVID-19, board and governance restrictions faced in the UK.
I think there's, I think one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of change. And I see this as an enormous opportunity for company secretaries and governance professionals. We sometimes have a reputation amongst some of our colleagues as being the administrators. I was once described as the business prevention officer by a less than charitable colleague. But I think this is a huge opportunity for our members, for us, to demonstrate that we have commercial skills, that we can be pragmatic, we can bring solutions to our organisations. One of the big challenges we've been dealing with here in the UK has been around the arrangements for AGMs. How do you hold your AGM in a COVID-19 environment where you are not allowed to have meetings more than 2 people? And actually, we've seen some companies come up with some really good pragmatic ways of addressing that. I attended what I believe is probably the first FTSE 100 company AGM held in the open air. That was a solution. There was another FTSE company, its AGM was held in a service station car park on the M25 because that was equidistant between the houses directors who were attending. There was another one held at the home of the company secretary because his wife happened to be a shareholder. That was a bit less fortunate because some journalists who had access to Street View looked at his address and made some rude comments about the quality of his gardening and his paintwork. But, you know, it's not helpful. But again, it was a pragmatic solution to the company's problem. And a number of the company secretaries I've been speaking to have been keen to say that they're receiving commendations from their boards for addressing these issues, for getting the organisation through these legal hurdles with the minimum of disruption. So I think that's the first point. It's a huge opportunity for the profession. I think the second point is that we are all under pressure to do things and to do things quickly. And to do things in a different way. I was saying just before the call started, I've done more webinars, I think, in the last month than I've done in the rest of my career, and that's quite exciting. I'm not as organised as Megan with the corporate backdrop, but you know, I'm going to get there, honestly. So I think there are lessons that we can all learn about how that works and about how we do things. One of the things that we are working on in the UK is a lessons learned from COVID-19 and from our profession's reaction to it. And looking at the things that we've done that have been, sort of extremely successful, and that members' good ideas, this really worked for me. One of the things we find with our guidance and that we try and circulate around members is people's tips, things that have worked well for them, because I think that really helps other professionals. And the other thing, this is a slightly more difficult one for all of us to own up to, is the things that we've done that kind of haven't worked quite so well. But again, that's a really useful learning for other professionals. So if we're able and willing to share it, I think that's enormously important. There are things that we have changed, which I'm sure we're going to carry on with in the future. There are things that we've changed that I'm pretty sure as soon as we can, people will go back to the status quo. So I think for me, those are the main messages about what we're seeing in terms of what the future might hold.
So thank you, Peter. I think if I'm just to sum it up, basically, it is what you're saying, it's an opportunity. So the question lies for the other panelists, is it a constraint or opportunity that you all face post-COVID for board and governance in your respective countries? So can we have Megan followed by the rest of the panelists joining in?
Yeah, certainly there's been a huge, I couldn't agree more with Peter. I think where we're turning our mind to now is where is the opportunity in all of this for us. The big challenge for directors is the complexity and velocity, the pace with which change has occurred. And we've been quite nimble in many of our political processes to make adaptations, for example, to the Corporations Act. The Treasurer in Australia has evoked his special to make changes to the Corporations Act to enable virtual AGMs, for example, to enable the digital signatures of documents, for example. But there is still a lot to be done, and agree with Peter, there's a huge amount of learning there. What of those changes should stick post-COVID? What of those changes should we add to our kit bag, if you like, of elements that will help us to evolve the way that we do things for the benefit of our corporations and society. So there's a huge conversation going on with regards to the processes that can be enabled, that have been enabled and can continue to be enabled to fast track some of the corporate law changes, some of the changes in the digital space, certainly some of the procedural changes. And I would also add to that many of the conversations that boards are having. Boards are having conversations around reorienting their companies to digital first in a much more expedient way than they were doing previously. It's become an imperative at the moment, because if you don't have a digital business in May of 2020, you don't probably have a business. So those conversations are all, I think, moving in the right direction. It's a matter of capturing the right learnings and making sure that they stick post-COVID.
Thank you, Megan. How about Ashish?
Yeah, in India, I agree with the panelists. It's an opportunity. Opportunities are more for the professionals. But we have to see this COVID-19 into three aspects. One is pre-COVID, second is during the COVID, and third is post-COVID. We are not aware what will happen post-COVID and how much time it will take. But during the COVID, it's an opportunity for the professionals, because the whole structure of governance has changed. Government has come out with so many relaxations as far as regulatory compliance and procedures are concerned. And I hope that most of the countries, government is most liberal in this period, and they have come out with so many relaxations as far as Companies Act, Corporate Act, and respective acts are concerned. But it's a challenge for the company secretaries to organize the board meetings and annual general meetings and resolve the queries of the stakeholders during this period, because social gathering, social distancing has to be maintained, and other procedural compliance has to be complied in a proper manner, because there are so many changes in the regulations day in and day out. So it's an opportunity for the professionals as far as the number of meetings are concerned, as far as e-board meeting, agenda, e-general meeting, and so many things are concerned. But yes, as far as governance is concerned, I think it's a basic framework for any of the corporate. And biggest challenge is to maintain the governance to the highest standards with the proper transparency and a commitment towards the problem solving of all the stakeholders across the concern.
Bentley, can we have some thought from you?
Yes, from a Sri Lankan scenario, I must say, I think this is a great opportunity and a great challenge for us here, because with COVID, changes have taken place. We were in the midst of digitalization with the ICT the previous years, but I think now it has to be accelerated, because although we had to overnight postpone meetings, AGMs in March, they're now going to be held on digital platforms. And I think that's great, because that's changing the scenario in this part of the world. And I'm happy about that. And I'm sure the company secretaries that we have here have got an opportunity. It's a challenge for them to demonstrate their skills. And I think this is an excellent opportunity. Of course, there are still drawbacks. Some of the drawbacks are some of the restrictions that we have, and we are still uncertain. As for e-signatures, I think it's acceptable, and I understand it's acceptable in Sri Lanka. And I think this is one opportunity where it makes life easier for company secretaries. But on the other hand, there are certain other drawbacks where we have large number of shareholders in some of the companies, which go into thousands. And for them, it's going to be difficult sometimes when you have a virtual meeting, an AGM, because some of them do not have laptops, nor do they have even a smartphone. So I think that's something that will have to be addressed for the future. Also, the same thing with proxies, voting by proxies. Now, this again, when there are large numbers, we've had some directive from the stock exchange, but I think this will have to be addressed, because there are going to be difficulties for when virtual meetings are held. So all in all, I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's the company secretary will play a pivotal role here, and hopefully we hope things will change in the future.
Thank you, Bentley. Mande, how about your thoughts on how it has affected, or what are the constraints and the opportunities that you all face post-COVID for governance in South Africa? And following that, we can have Mary speak on behalf of Singapore.
It would appear that the trends are similar with my colleagues' countries. You know, one of the principal effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions, you know, that are placed on both the travel and the gatherings, is that it will often not be possible, you know, for all directors, shareholders or stakeholders, as the case may be, to all gather under one roof. So that's a challenge. It may even be impossible, you know, to get the required quorum, because also, you know, a problem to get the required quorum together, to put together, for example, to vote on important issues. So the companies will need to make arrangements for the directors or shareholders to discuss and vote on issues. So in doing so, you know, it must still comply with the requirements, for example, of our own country's Companies Act of 2008 and other regulations and laws, in order to ensure that the resolutions or decisions that are taken, you know, are legal and valid, and not open to technical challenges at a later stage. You know, for example, in South Africa, a board meeting, shareholders meeting, may be conducted by electronic communication, unless the company's MOI, Memorandum of Incorporation, prohibits it. So it's important to look at various regulations, various laws, you know, King 4, and all of that. So as for example, in the case of shareholders meetings, directors may participate in a meeting by electronic communication, so long as the electronic communication facility enables everyone, all participants, to communicate concurrently with each other without any intermediary, and to participate in effectively in the meeting. So it's important to balance the laws, you know, with what is happening now.
I think that's very interesting, given the fact that while governance in corporates are drastically changing, how fast the laws and government entities also match up to that speed is also been very critical at this stage. So I think that's an interesting statement there. Mary, how about what is the current situation in Singapore?
Right. In Singapore, we do have a lot of challenges, as well as we do see opportunities, right? For the company secretaries, challenges that the other panelists have raised, the company secretary in Singapore do face the same challenges as well. Especially, we all know the critical role that company secretary plays in supporting the board of directors in discharging their duties and responsibilities. If I may just share, for example, in China, the position of a company secretary is called 董事会秘书, and it means secretary of the board of directors. So it tells you how important it is, you know, the company secretary is supporting the board. And indeed, with national borders closure, with lockdowns, and directors could no longer fly into Singapore for physical meetings, we need to do video conference meeting. We need to ensure securities, IT securities. And these are concerns that directors would have as well. And as well as, well, good for us that we have BoardPAC, that we could upload our papers on BoardPAC meeting papers. So, and we could do electronic approval in Singapore. It is permissible. And resolutions that are approved electronically, they are admissible to the court as evidence. So we could do that in Singapore. So, but having said this, you see, many of us, as we implement all these digital processes in our work, in supporting the directors in their decision making, in the approval process, we also roll this out to our subsidiaries, our subsidiary boards. But however, not all entities in a company could apply this. For example, in China, if we have a subsidiary in China, Chinese resolution must be physically signed. So I could not roll this out in China. And some resolution must be signed in black ink. No ballpoints, no blue ink, because the bank will not accept the resolutions. And the local authority will not accept the resolutions. So that, well, there is limitations to how far we can go in implementing digital processes in the company. And in this very critical moment, COVID-19, resolutions have to be couriered from one director to another for signing, and this slows down the entire process. And this is a challenge that we are facing because we are not just Singapore, we are also global, and we have establishment in different parts of the world as well. With regards to annual general meeting, well, of course, we all know that this is a very important forum to communicate with shareholders. And due to COVID-19 and the requirements on social distancing, many companies in Singapore were unable to hold their AGM as usual. AGMs were conducted through electronic means such as video conference via webcast in Singapore. And one good news for many of us is the Singapore Stock Exchange is providing a grant of up to $5,000 per listed company to help us to defray the additional cost of organizing AGMs during this period of time. Well, although this is currently introduced as a temporary measure, well, this could pave the way for the possibility of future shareholders meetings being held remotely. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think we all kind of stepped on an important aspect. I think recently I was listening to a governance webinar done by Oxford, and the main highlight that they spoke in that webinar also was on corporate governance digitalization. I think, like very rightly what Megan said, digitalization is not an option anymore, it's mandatory. So taking that into consideration, my question to the panelists today is, how can technology help improve governance across organizations now? And with this, how is the role of a company secretary changing with digital governance coming into play? I do understand now, I think very rightly, like Mary said, in certain countries, like even Japan, they do not allow digital signature. They need a seal as well. But in certain countries like Sri Lanka, the US, India, there are a lot of places which do allow e-signature that has made life easy. So how can technology help improve governance across organizations, and what kind of a role will company secretaries play? So can we have Ashish probably starting and others kind of supporting and disrupting his topic? Yeah.
Yes, now the role of company secretary has changed, and digital signature and has made the life easy, because in India digital signature is allowed, and government has come out with the relaxation that even the agenda papers and other papers can be sent digitally signed. But the main thing is to keeping the digital signatures and the security, which other has also raised, that we have to think about the security, because cyber risk is the main risk as far as company secretaries are concerned. And sending the agenda papers, board meeting papers and supporting papers, because sometimes there are issues related to cyber. And video conferencing, like we all are sitting in a different countries and making this webinar happening. So now it is possible for board meetings also. Government has made it allow for the board meeting. Earlier, there was some restriction as far as board meeting provision are concerned, that certain resolutions cannot be passed through e-board meeting or digital board meeting. Now it has been allowed. Even the annual general meeting has been allowed through this digital mode. But the main important thing about the role of the company secretary in this arena is about the updation of the knowledge with the updated provisions and the relaxations. And the most important thing about the economic challenges, because government and other governments, because if you have a subsidiary in different countries and the provision of different countries are different. Once there is a closing of financial year of 31st December, in India, it's a 31st March. So you have a 6 months for the AGM. In some countries, it is 6 months, that 30th June. That will not be possible in this COVID area. So updation about the knowledge with different provision, different updations across the world. So that is the most important task. And the major change and the major opportunity for the company secretaries is appearance before the judicial and quasi-judicial authorities. Because earlier there was a High Court, Supreme Court, and law provisions are personal hearing before them. Now it is also happening through video conferencing. So it's the biggest opportunity that you can do all your processes sitting at home. And there are some challenges, major challenges, IT and cyber risk.
Very good. Can we have from others?
I'm happy to jump in there. Look, the digitization of all governance processes is multi-layered. And so I put it into normally 3 baskets. There's an administration element, and that is, the electronic signing of board papers, the, just the administration, sending out board papers electronically, having them on a digital platform, being able to, have conversations over secure platforms. And there is no doubt that that is the way of the future, but that was already happening well before COVID-19. For most organisations, using technology to create efficiencies in the administration of all sorts of jobs across the organisation, and governance is absolutely not immune. That was happening anyway. I think the acceleration of that for many organisations has caught them flat-footed, and certainly the legislative and regulatory regime in many countries has not kept pace. Interestingly, some of the changes that the Treasurer in Australia has made using his executive powers were changes that had been mooted by industry 10 years ago, and they just hadn't found their way through the bureaucratic processes of government to be enacted in the legislature. So it's accelerated thinking, but many of this has already been thought about in the past. The second layer is really around compliance and the role of the company secretary and the governance professional with respect to compliance. And we, in fact, at the Governance Institute of Australia last year produced a report looking at the future of the company secretary, the future of the governance professional. And many, once again, of these essential ideas were mooted in that report. But with regards to compliance, some of the acceleration around how company secretaries will deal with regulators, how they will deal with things like their audit process in organisations where auditors can't physically come on site to look through the paperwork at audit time. So there'll be a compliance element to what the company secretary is really being challenged to do. The biggest and by far most important layer, and that is the layer of performance, and the role that the company secretary brings to enhance the performance of decision making and therefore to enhance the performance of the organisation. And once again, even within that performance element, that is very highly multi-layered when you're talking about a technology environment. You consider how things used to be done 20 years ago. The company secretary would physically print papers and bind them and courier them to directors, and directors would then read them, and postal services were slow. So the lag time between the time that the information was produced by the different business units and the time of the board meeting could sometimes be months in terms of the lag of information. Now we have real-time analytics. So then we move to a digital environment, so we can send out, so many, the practice of many boards now is that the papers will be produced 2 weeks out, the papers will be sent to directors 1 week or so out. It'll differ from company to company. And so the lag time there on information is about 2 weeks. Well, goodness me, February of 2020 feels like about 20 years away for me. That lag time is not sufficient anymore. We need real-time information, and data analytics makes that possible in boardrooms where boards can get the information, commercial information as recent as the morning of the board meeting or the day before the board meeting. So that means that the role of the governance professional in terms of understanding how to not just produce that information, but to curate it so that it's enabling the right conversations and therefore the right decision-making processes. So there's a huge degree of change in terms of the speed of delivery. As I said, the velocity of change has really ramped up in the current time, but it was already a process that was well in train. This has just escalated it exponentially.
I think, thank you, Megan, that was very insightful. I think before I just address it to the other panelists, I would like to welcome Rahul Bhai, Company Secretary of Banks International, Malaysia. Hi. So I think the question we raised right now was, given COVID-19 coming into play, organizations have moved to digital platforms in terms of how they manage meetings, and digitalization has been at the forefront of digital governance. So how is it impacting, how can technology help improve governance across organizations in Malaysia? And what sort of a role change do you see company secretaries have? So that's the question.
Okay, thank you, Sarath. Hello. Actually, I think the situation in Malaysia is more or less with the other countries also. Now we are moving to digital and meeting more. All the meetings are now conducted virtually. The biggest challenge for us is to educate our board members and also the management team who are really involved in this process. And after the management control order has been implemented, it was quite prompt to us also, because the announcement was made like 2 days before it's going to be implemented. So everything should be done very fast, and our Secretariat division need to conduct meetings as scheduled, because we need to comply with the governance, and we should have the meeting number of meetings per year. So in terms of corporate governance, nothing has changed, but the adherence to it, last time we need to submit physical papers to our regulator, and then the submission also need we have system for that. We did submit report and all that via the system, but at the same time physical report also required, but due to this COVID, everything has changed like very fast. So now the regulator already allow us to submit all the reports digitally. So because of this force, we know that we are capable to use digital and the technologies, but until COVID is already happened, then we know that we really can make use of the technology. And for the board meetings, we are thankful because we already started with the paperless meeting using this board since 2015. So it's not much hassle for us to deal with the digital paper with the board members and also the management. That's all.
Sarath, if I can jump in there.
Yes,
I think that actually goes right back to some of the things I was saying at the beginning about the opportunity. Certainly, we've been seeing some changes, and as Raha, you said, nothing has really changed in the sense of what we have to do. But what we've been seeing is some changes in the way that we're able to do things, and some of those have been happening much more quickly than I was expecting. I was talking to the company secretary of one of our big banks the other day, which has always resisted e-signatures from its customers. And he was saying that within 3 weeks, they are now accepting electronic signatures from their customers on bank documents. And he said if I'd kicked that off as a project, if I'd estimated 3 years, at the, that would have been very, very optimistic. And yet it's happened. Companies House in the UK, the registrar of companies, has always insisted that if you send a form into Companies House that requires a payment, you must send a cheque or a postal order. I haven't seen a postal order for about 10 years, but hey, yeah, you have to send a cheque. Well, they are now accepting electronic payments. And do I think they are going to go back in 3 months' time to saying, now you must send us a cheque or a postal order? Frankly, no, I don't. I think they're going to be able to use that more modern technique. So I think that's an important way in which a lot of what we do is helped by technology. 2 other quick things on that as well. I think one of the areas in which I am seeing change in the use of technology in the governance professional's role is very much in the areas that I would regard as the chores, the things you kind of have to do. When I first started as a company secretary, one of the things we had to do was to keep registers of shareholders, and typically of our subsidiary companies, which were in longhand in a ledger. Yes, I am that old. Now we keep that all online in a WYSI system that one of the many providers is able to offer for us. That was a chore, that was drudgery. I don't have to do that now. It's much easier online, and I can press a button and it will produce the form for Companies House. Hopefully now those providers will be updating their systems so that I produce the form and it makes an electronic payment to Companies House, rather than me having to print the wretched thing off and add a check to it. But that's a further development. Why I think that is important for governance professionals is that it takes away the time-consuming, low-value things that we do, and gives us more opportunity to focus on the higher impact, higher value things that we do. looking after the board, supporting the board. If there are no chairmen on the call, dare I say, managing the board, because I think that's something that more often than not the governance professional actually has to do. One of the things that I've talked to a number of company secretaries about when we produced some guidance on how to do a virtual board meeting. One of the things that I talked to a number of company secretaries about when we were doing that was the fact that they have in many cases become the IT consultant to some of their directors. That's when those directors aren't in the happy position of being able to get their children or grandchildren to do the IT work for them. The company secretary is doing it. And that's building that relationship with their directors, where their directors rely on the company secretary or governance professional to help them with their responsibilities. And I think that's enormously powerful.
Thank you, Peter. Can we have Bentley share his thoughts on it?
Yes, I would like to go with something that Peter just said about being tech savvy. And I think we have that problem too with some of the directors of boards where, I mean, their knowledge of IT and things like that are not as good. So they, as Peter said, they use others to help them out. But I think this is something where I think we need to have in the future boards to have their directors training in these little things which will make them more perfect. There are also other areas where you find, I was talking to one of the company secretaries yesterday, and I was told that some of the directors now, they don't respond fast enough to digital information. They don't read their papers fast enough, although BoardPAC has all this there. So it takes, time. So this is something that has got to be addressed. I mean, these are little things where I think the company secretary could make life easier if directors also fall in line. Those are some of my thoughts on that. And also one other thing, we were talking about meetings, and I think having meetings in Sri Lanka, we do have a lot of foreign directors on our boards. And virtual meetings, I think, should come to stay. It's a good thing, because although we do not have them physically, we are assured that their presence will be there on the board. But more importantly, I think it's the cost reduction, the reduction of travel costs, the reduction of hotel accommodation. I think these are going to help the economy when we are struggling. So these are some of the points I think where it's going to help us. And I think we should have these matters addressed by the authorities here and some of the boards here. Also, one other point I'm sort of disappointed to note in Sri Lanka is, although we're having rapid digitalization and the ICT acting fast to get things in place, it's very sad to note that our register of companies is still far lagging and not geared to cope up with this, because they are only digitalized with having incorporations online. Everything else is manual, so that defeats the purpose. And I think this is where we need government intervention or people in the ministries to look at this and take action fast, because there's no point if we cannot have, if we're having digitalization and we cannot have the regulatory bodies acting. Most regulatory bodies are digitalized and are fairly good. But I think I can't say the same for our register of companies, which is far behind time. And even staff do not have laptops. So working from home in a time like this when there's a crisis, I mean, defeats the purpose. So I think this is another point which has to be thought of fairly in an important manner in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Bentley. I think again, an interesting fact you brought forward was the cost-saving factor. I think a few years ago it was customer is king. You take care of the customer, your organization is going to do well. Then came along, your employee is king. Treat your employees as king, and they will treat your customers as king, and you'll do well. But I think now all organizations globally are believing in the fact that cash is king, because right now it's every penny that you can save, and in whatever means and modes that you can do. And it's not just the short term, the long run, how you can sustain and save money for organizations is going to be a fundamental thing. So cash is king is, I think, globally is something that I think will catch on. So thank you, Bentley, on that. And I would love to hear Mande's and then Mary's input on the same question. On what sort of a role change do you see with digitalization coming into play?
All right. You know, the reality of the matter really is that the effects of COVID-19 on the economy has led many companies, you know, facing the possibility of being declared financially distressed. You know, the mounting pressure on company secretaries and directors to appropriately fulfill their duties in response to this crisis will certainly continue into the foreseeable future, definitely. Company secretaries, therefore, must implement good governance and put contingency plans in place in order to cope. So really, there's no single right way to do this, but many boards will surely establish what we call a COVID-19 crisis committee, even though ultimately the decisions of the board, of any board committee, are the responsibility of the board. So with technology, really, the board of directors of a company need to ensure that all decisions are taken in line with the required corporate governance procedures, applicable to that company. Like I've mentioned before, obviously, each company must look into its own MOI if it allows for such technology, in order to ensure that such are valid and binding. So the use really of technology is of particular importance, given that the companies are now suddenly faced with the challenge that all applicable decision makers are unable, for example, to attend meetings in person, and with all potential decisions, therefore, need to be taken by either electronically or round-robin basis. So it's important that company secretaries should come up with effective ways for the boards to access board and committee papers and to supplement such information directly into their tablets, iPad devices, or laptops. So this ultimately will enable efficient and secure access to board papers timelessly, and conducting meetings digitally and accessing meeting documents in a secure and collaborative manner, which will enable quick decision making. So there's just lastly 4 things that in terms of company secretary, when they have to facilitate digital governance, in terms of adding value to their companies, they must ensure, for example, that documents and feedback is digitized for easier access and archiving. So it must support collaboration, quick decision making, and easy feedback on meeting documents. And suppose of importance to everyone in South Africa is always security. Is it secure access? Is it ISO 9001 certified, etc., in terms of encrypt data with customized security policies? And lastly, does it enable viewing and updating of documents in real time, on any tablet or laptop or anything, in order to reduce the printing of meeting documents, which has become now quite expensive.
Thank you, Mande. Can we have Mary give her thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'll say this from 2 perspectives as a company secretary. Support for the board, I have said earlier. The role of a company secretary with digital governance involve not just improving efficiency and effectiveness of the board's function, but also to ensure that securities and risk management in this aspect. IT securities, as we organize video conference for board meetings, uploading papers on digital platforms such as BoardPAC, and protecting documents that contain sensitive information with password, etc. The board expects the company secretary to do all this now. It's no longer printing of meeting papers for directors. That has passed long time ago, right? With regards to video conference, and yes, indeed, some company secretaries I spoke to, we have to even conduct a trial before the board meeting. So next week is the board meeting. This week I better do a trial. Directors who doesn't know how to do video conference, please join the trial, and I'll teach you how to do it, which button to click, to that extent. But to be fair, the board comprises of people with a balanced skill set. Some of them are very good in areas where the company has operations in. Some people are very good in industry that the company operates in, but not all of them are IT savvy. But they have to learn. And they have to accept the fact that they need to learn, and they must learn, and they must follow the footsteps. Otherwise, they can't function. So I think this is a fact that many directors have accepted already in Singapore, right? I believe it is the same for many other countries as well. For the shareholders have to also accept this. Let me just share with you, just last week, Singapore authorities have introduced temporary measure which allows listed company and parties involved in rights issues, takeover or merger transactions, the option to electronically disseminate offer documents through publication on the corporate website, stock exchange website. This is to reduce manpower needed to be physically present at workplaces to prepare, to print, and deliver large number of offer documents, right? Under these temporary measures, when offer documents are electronically disseminated, hard copy notification must be sent to shareholders with instructions on how they can access the electronic version of the offer documents. And the hard copy application and acceptance forms must also be sent to the shareholders. So this goes to say that although this is currently introduced as a temporary measure, but it is possible that this will become the new norm after COVID-19. That is to say that shareholders may no longer receive offer documents or circulars on details of significant corporate actions. So I think this is something that we see for the future. In the name of sustainability, I think we are not going to get any more like, you know, the 5,000 subsidies from stock exchange.
Mary, thank you. I think that was very insightful. I think, again, you did mention the key word, the new norm, how things are going to change and how these changes post-COVID, how it will become naturally the new norm in how company secretaries and boards will manage in the future. So with that, I think I would like to ask the panelists, in your opinion, the future board meeting trends, again, in terms of location, diversity, frequency. Now, in certain countries, we have board meetings annually, some biannually, some quarterly. Will that change? Because with uncertainty, does boards have to meet frequently? Is that something that's going to rise? And also, how the shareholder AGM meetings, what are the future trends that you are seeing in your respective regions and globally, which in terms of opinion? Love to hear from you all.
I think I'll start. Let us start. So this COVID-19 has made all of us in the same boat. We all are having a same journey, and almost provisions in all the countries were similar or identical. And now if I have seen the process of board meetings and annual general meetings, I have analyzed some of the countries' provision related to board meeting. Then every country has made a certain relaxations and a great relaxations for the purpose of ease of doing business in their respective countries. Because in some countries, companies has to adopt the annual accounts for the annual end or the quarter end or the half year end. So it is utmost necessary that board meeting has to be held. And in some countries, this is a time of the annual general meeting because of the annual closure of 31st of December. So it's a big challenge. And as far as location, diversity and frequency is concerned, in India also it has been relaxed. And in so many countries it has relaxed, that now instead of 4 meetings in a quarter, you can have 3 meetings, or gap has been relaxed from 120 days to 180 days, or the process of passing of resolutions through circulation, through video conferencing, and in case of general meetings, it is through e-voting. And even the physical dispatch has been waived off, because we all are living in the arena of COVID-19 where lockdown is there in so many countries. So even you cannot dispatch the dividend warrants, which is a dividend and right of the shareholder in terms of amount. So if it is demat and if they can be otherwise you cannot even dispatch the physical dividend warrants. So yes, so many changes are there, and we should appreciate the governments of all the countries that they have understood this COVID-19, and they all have given a great relaxation as far as law of the respective countries and for the ease of doing, and which will definitely relax the burden of company secretaries as far as compliance is concerned, because the responsibility of the prime responsibility of the company secretary is to maintain the compliance level to have a better corporate governance and better national governance.
That's a really interesting one from my perspective, because we haven't yet seen very much in the way of legal changes coming from the government. They're worrying about other things, and when we press them on making changes about company legislation, we've got quite a firm pushback to say, yeah, we'll get to it, but there are quite a lot of other more important things that the government are focusing on. Yeah. So for me, one of the interesting things has been the opportunity, as I said earlier, for company secretaries and governance professionals to demonstrate their pragmatism and the way in which they can get to a solution that is legally compliant and yet still respect the, in our case, the stay-at-home measures. Gave examples earlier on of some of the changes, some of the practical changes that people have done to their AGMs, adjourning meetings, just being practical about making those changes. And I think for the overwhelming majority of UK companies, certainly, there's actually been no need for a change to legislation. It just meant that you've had to think a little bit more laterally about what you're doing. And I will confess that I've been guilty in the past, and I suspect a number of others have been as well, of a sort of a rinse and repeat approach to your AGM or your board meetings. Here's the one we did last time, change the dates, change a couple of resolutions, that'll do, that's fine. You can't do that this year. You've got to actually think about it. You've got to think about what the implications are for your board, for your shareholders. I don't know what the typical attendance of AGMs is in some other jurisdictions. Here, it is very much the case that the people who actually physically attend an AGM are, how can I put this delicately and politely, in what is often regarded as a high-risk group for COVID-19, typically the over 70s. And yeah, that's fine and that's great, and it's really good that they do come along to those meetings. But we've got to take account of the risks to our shareholders, to our members, and to our employees. So thinking laterally about the way in which we address those AGM issues, actually most UK companies have managed to get through the season doing something and generally doing their best. And there have been, as I said earlier, some really innovative ways of dealing with the situation that people have come up with. It's not to say they can't improve it. I don't think they'll do all those things next year. It would be great to get back to having a physical AGM, but you know, it's something that we've had to do and we've had to manage.
Yeah, I might jump in there because I just wanted to comment on something that Peter talked about there, and that is the innovation born of necessity. And I think it's a really important point. Although in Australia we have had, as I said, some relaxation of the legislative requirements through special powers, albeit that they're temporary at the moment and we'd like to see them extended. I think that there has been a rinse and repeat on something like an AGM, for example, for many nations right across the globe. And the reality of not being able to have physical participants in a meeting in a confined space has meant that we need to think differently around the intent of the legislation, and that is, what is the purpose of that shareholder event? What is the purpose of an AGM? And how do you have a real communication, a real dialogue with your shareholders that is meaningful, that is not just a small ginger group that like to turn up for the cookies, but is a real interactive group And to that end, I have to say the virtual AGMs that we've had in Australia, and we're moving, companies are now moving as we ease restrictions more to a hybrid model. But the virtual AGMs have in some circumstances been more well attended than any of the other physical AGMs, because you're now able to communicate with a different cohort of people, people who might be physically and geographically remote and not able to travel into the venue of the AGM, people who are introverts and don't like attending an AGM in person, but like to submit questions via an electronic format, younger generations who are time poor, who have got young families. So there's a whole new breed of people who are now able to interact, because we're thinking about interaction differently and thinking about the intent of the interaction. On the topic of how boards are behaving in Australia, I would say our experience is in fact very different, and that is our boards have obviously are meeting digitally using Zoom and other platforms, but they are meeting far more frequently. They are meeting for shorter periods of time with a tighter agenda because of being an electronic format. So once again, because the requirements from government regarding social distancing for many companies was changing day by day over the last couple of months. You are having, you know, today you can have 2 people in a room together. Tomorrow you can only have 1 person in a room together. Tomorrow, the next day after that, we'd like everyone to work from home. The next day after that, the schools are closed. So because that was changing every day, and that meant that many businesses were having to completely reorient their strategy very, very quickly, that meant that the pace, the cadence of board meetings has increased significantly. Some boards I know have shifted to weekly meetings, that they were meeting every week to look at strategy, look at the business response to the government restrictions, pivot that strategy and reorient the business in a meaningful way. And of course, then the corollary for the company secretary, what that means is you can't be providing a board pack of 100 or 200 pages of worth of papers every week for a board meeting. So you have to become a master curator of information, and that takes a huge amount of time and energy. I always go back to the great Mark Twain quote, and that is, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. To curate information is much more time and resource consuming than to provide voluminous amounts of digital information. And so that's where the role of the company secretary is really coming to the fore, because the judgment involved in creating fit for purpose papers in the right format at the right time has really never been more important for boards to make good decisions.
Bentley, would you like to add on? I think it was very interesting the fact that you also said, Megan, the fact that higher in terms of numbers walking in for meetings, and also in terms of the cost factor. So can this be the new norm for AGMs? Is that something I would like to ask you, and probably followed by the other panelists as well?
I think that hybrid AGMs are going to be the new norm. I think that, once again, if you look at the intent of an AGM, it is to provide an avenue for consultation directly with shareholders. Different shareholders will want to communicate in different ways, and the way of the future is to enable multiple channels to be able to allow that consultation to take place. So I think you'll see a lot more hybrid AGMs in the future, where you will have a portion of your shareholders that still want to turn up physically will do so, but that will be supplemented by those who want to be able to ask questions and interact with directors digitally.
So best of both worlds, people who want the cookies plus people who want to actually interact. It's fantastic. So can we have from the other panelists as well?
I just throw in the one virtual meeting I attended, the one sort of meeting that I attended, I did make sure that there were cookies provided and ate one. I'm just going to say very quickly that having just said that the UK government hasn't published anything, I've just had something flash into my inbox saying, oh, we're announcing it today. So I'll keep you all posted on that. Everything changes.
Thank you, Peter. Rahul, please.
I think there will be more virtual meetings after this. But for company secretary, we have to really work hand in hand with the IT team to ensure that the glitches during the meeting will be reduced. And also, like Mary said just now, we did the same. Actually, we had a trial board meeting 2 or 3 days before the real meeting. This is just to ensure that they are familiar and they know what to click and what to do when the meeting is going on. So it's just a matter of educating the board member, and I think eventually they will adopt with this new normal. And given the flexibility of the virtual meeting, they can be anywhere, and the meeting can be the meeting can be take place anywhere, anytime. So I think after this there will be more meeting, virtual meeting. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Rahul. Can we have a few words and probably, or Mande probably speak on the same topic?
Well,
you know, for South Africa, really, in terms of AGM meetings, following steps taken and announced by the government and our president, and the limitations that are there on gatherings, as well as guidance that were issued by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in relation to the use of electronic means for purposes of shareholder meetings. The precautionary and responsible decision really was made to allow for electronic participation only, and that no physical attendance will be permissible. So that was a directive from the JSE. As a result thereof, you know, shareholder meetings are no longer available for physical participation and can only be accessible virtually. So in addition to that, information on how to participate virtually was communicated in our last board meeting, shareholder meeting, for example, to all shareholders via SENS announcements and through the company's website. So really virtual meetings, including live video and audio stream, you know, with the ability to view the company's slides and presentation, you know, provide stakeholders with full remote meeting access, you know. So your shareholders really are fully authenticated, you know, at point of use to participate, to ask questions, and to vote electronically, really in real time. So there's absolutely no concerns or special considerations, even from a quorum perspective, for a fully virtual meeting. So it will be the new norm.
Hi, Bentley. Can we have your thoughts on the same?
yes, as Megan said, I think the future is going to be hybrid meetings, and I think that will be the way forward. And hopefully, in this part of the world, in Sri Lanka, I think that will come to stay, because either it's going to be AGMs will be either virtual or it could be hybrid. But I think most board meetings will be of hybrid. Some will be there and some will be electronically connected. But another point I would like to make is the committees like the risk committee. I think these committees will play a very important part in governance in the future. The audit committee, the role of the audit committee, because methods of accounting and auditing will have to change with all these new things happening. And also for those risk committee, there's so many risks going to be involved. I was talking with Peter a few days ago, and he was telling me that some companies do not cater for a pandemic or an epidemic. I think the institute itself. So I mean, these are certain aspects that will have to be looked at. Also, cyber security, the security of documents, data protection. All this is going to play a very important part and will have to be looked into in the future. Of course, BoardPAC has a good scheme where they are sort of military encrypted for their BoardPAC security when it comes to e-signatures. But at the same time, other parts of the world accept e-signatures, and so do we. But laws may have to change. Laws will have to be changed, because I don't think in Sri Lanka some of the laws, the articles will have to be amended to provide for some of these, and I don't think the laws provide for cases if brought to court where the signatures, e-signatures are accepted. So I think the little things like this will need to be looked at for the future.
Thank you, Bentley. I think we'll just head over to Mary on her opinion on what are the future trends, followed by we'll quickly go into another question that we have planned, and then we'll go for a Q&A. So we do stick to our time limitations as governance professionals. We need to comply to the start time and the end time. So I think, Mary, if you don't mind, just give your input on where do you see, I think we heard many people saying it's an opportunity, and then again, we spoke about hybrid meetings being the new norm. What is your take on this?
Yes, like I said earlier, in Singapore, right now, the stock exchange is giving away, I won't say giving away, is providing a grant of up to $5,000 for each listed company to help us to defray additional costs in organizing AGMs during this period of time. And I do see this as a way to go in future, that it is the future shareholders meeting could be held remotely. And yes, of course, without the $5,000 in future. The benefits of this, I think it is clear that it offers shareholders the opportunity to participate online, which means that they can participate if they cannot make it to the physical meeting, so they can still do it online. It also means less traveling by shareholders, and it also saves time and money for shareholders. But I do foresee that there are also challenges to work on this kind of hybrid AGMs. For example, to ensure there is a secure authentication process, and you are really having your own shareholders attending your own meeting and not somebody else, you know. And the digital transmission of proxies and the online votings, and I think with the current technology advancement, I believe all this can be resolved. And yes, I agree that this is the way to go.
Thank you, Mary. I think I'll just post this question to Peter. I think Mande also very rightly spoke that a lot of organizations globally are at financial risk. We heard big retailers like Macy's, Versace, JCPenney are at financial crunches right now. So this means the big 3 C's come into play, which is communicate, communicate, and communicate. Now that is going to be very fundamentally important when it comes to boards and governance. So how boards should support the senior management to ensure that you communicate rightly to the employees, to the stakeholders, the shareholders. So what sort of a role should boards play in terms of assisting senior management for this?
In many ways, I don't think it's much different from their normal role of being a sounding board, being an advisory board, you know, sort of supporting management and helping management address those issues. I mean, you rightly mentioned there, Sarath, some of the other stakeholders beyond the owners, beyond the shareholders, and certainly we've seen a greater focus on communication with the wider stakeholders of an organisation during COVID-19 situation. It's something that I think is really important for boards to just oversee management effectively and take a view on, well, are you doing the right things? Are you missing a group of stakeholders? What are you doing? How are you doing things? How are you communicating effectively? I think that's a really important aspect of the board's oversight, but I don't think it's particularly different from their normal day-to-day role, to be absolutely honest with you at this stage, because that's what they would be doing normally.
I think
Yes.
the most important one point which I want to cover as far as this responsibility or role of the board in this COVID-19 is to review the policies in an overall manner, because it is having a short-term impact, it is having a long-term impact. So health, safety and security is also very important as far as senior management is concerned, or as far as labor is concerned, or as far as the whole security and safety of the organization is concerned. So reviewing the existing policies 360 degree is the major responsibility of the board in this COVID-19.
I think that gives a quite an interesting overview. Megan, would you like to add anything? How the boards, where you think should really assist the management in terms of governing good governance across organizations?
Certainly, boards are rightly there to advise and assist management, but I think something that boards have to have, certainly in the last couple of months in Australia, have had to be particularly acutely aware of, and that is their continuous disclosure obligations. It's very difficult when you're in the midst of scenario planning, when there is so much uncertainty with regards to what the future holds for your strategy as a business, for your business viability, to be able to producing accurate information for shareholders under continuous disclosure measures, particularly when today you might do some modelling that says parts of your business might be unviable, and tonight the government announces a relief package or a fiscal stimulus package which tomorrow make them viable again. And so it's a real challenge for directors to be giving the right continuous disclosure information to shareholders, so as not to be yo-yoing that advice up and down so as to create massive volatility in markets. So that has been one of the challenges, and it's something that the board needs to be highly aware of.
Thank you, Megan. I think given the time stipulation, I will move into some Q&A. I think we have got a few on email and also put on. Yeah, so I will just take a few questions and I'll probably address it to for the panelists here. A question is, any thoughts on how best to conduct AGMs? I think we spoke of it, but if there's any other aspect that Ashish would like to share, any thoughts on how best to conduct AGMs?
No, AGM, first of all, we have to comply with the rule, regulations of the respective country. But social distancing is important. If AGM cannot be conducted through e-mode and physical mode is necessary, then we have to take the proper measures to have the social distancing, to organize the AGM, and minimum participation of the shareholders in the physical meeting and maximum participation of the shareholders through e-voting. So that will be the safest and best mode to organize the annual general meeting. But the most important thing, as shareholders are not attending or they are attending in the less numbers, so transparency is required, and proper notice and agenda with the complete explanatory statement should be provided to the shareholders to have the proper clarity of the agenda item.
Thank you, Ashish. I think that was quite insightful. So, Mande, given the fact that as a company secretary and also as a lawyer, I think I'll pose this question to you. So the question is, will they have AGMs without audited accounts?
Audit accounts. Because in South Africa, there's a directive, especially for listed entities really, that, you know, there will, and the restrictions from the government in terms of people being in the same place and all of that, you know, there are no more physical AGMs held. Everything is done through visual or live video conferencing. So, you know, it can still be audited. We've got auditors that are dialing in also online. We've got the scrutineers in terms of voting. They're also dialing in and the votes are counted, for example. and audited and released on SENS. So there is actually no problems at all with conducting such AGMs via electronic communication.
Okay, thanks, Mande. So I think a lot of the questions here are focused on AGMs, but I think like what we read in his book, I think that's a big concern. A lot of people have probably the cookies or probably them attending, but I think AGMs have been like a hot topic here. Okay, yeah. I have a question for Peter. So it says post-COVID-19, what measures have a BoardPAC and the Chartered Governance Institute taken? I cannot answer BoardPAC, but in terms of post-COVID-19, what measures have the Chartered Governance Institute taken in terms of assisting governance professionals globally?
Well, I can only really talk for the UK, Republic of Ireland, Associated Territories. I'll leave Megan to talk for GIA. What we've done is established a COVID-19 hub on our website, where we've captured our guidance. We've produced guidance on virtual meetings, on annual general meetings. So by that I mean virtual board meetings, annual general meetings, the withdrawal or amendment of dividend resolutions. We've seen a number of companies doing that. That's not difficult to do, but there's a certain choreography that you have to go through in order to get that in the sort of done properly. So we've picked that up. And we've also put on there various other guidance and good stuff that we've seen from other organisations, whether that be other divisions of the Institute, whether that be government and regulators, in some cases simply particularly instructive advice that we've seen from law firms. There was one I saw the other day on force majeure, which was probably the simplest explanation of the implications of COVID-19 on force majeure or vice versa that I've seen. So we've put that on there, and we keep working through doing those things. Webinars like this one, we've done a number of our own, and sort of dealing through our helpline with the member queries that are raised to us. There's that. There's also continued engagement with government and regulators, looking at what changes or relaxations of law and regulation would be useful, and trying to make sure that the things that get picked up are actually the things that really matter. Typical example is around AGMs. We've talked about those a fair bit. In the UK, we're quite lucky in that the quorum for most company AGMs is 2 people. So if you can get 2 people present somewhere, that's fine. That's why one of our companies was able to have a quarter AGM with the company secretary and his wife, who was a shareholder, having that FTSE company's AGM in their front lounge. It's why my wife is a FTSE company secretary. I have a share in the company. We held their AGM on the common at the end of our road. It was great. It was a nice sunny day. I'm not sure I'd have liked it if it was raining, but there you go. So yeah, you've got that issue is relatively straightforward for companies. If you're a forum for your AGM is 100 people and you cannot have anybody doing that virtually, you've got a big problem. So that's the sort of thing we've been trying to focus government and regulators on, is dealing with the issues that are actually insuperable issues, rather than the issues that with a bit of lateral thinking you can work your way around. As I said right at the start, I mean, for me, it's that lateral thinking that is the opportunity for the governance professional to demonstrate the value that they're bringing to their organisation. Thank
you, Peter. So how differently is the Chartered Governance Institute in Australia and Sri Lanka functioning? And I think followed that, I'd also like to know from Ashish, how differently are you all doing to support the members? So if we can have, how differently from what Peter stated?
Thanks. So look, I won't add too much, because essentially we've done all the same things that the UK has done. We have a special dedicated resource hub on our website. We've pivoted our events to digital events. In fact, we just held a 2-day governance and risk management forum conference online, completely online, on Monday and Tuesday earlier this week, very successfully, I would say. We've pivoted, in particular, all of our postgraduate students into a digital learning environment, and we'll be able to continue to graduate students as per normal, but in a digital environment. We have similarly engaged with government and the regulators. I have never been on so many Zoom meetings with ministers as I have in the last 2 months. As I said, they're much more interested in the policy response that is necessary under COVID-19 than they are in the politics of kissing babies running up to election campaigns at present, which is very pleasing, and I wish it might continue. So we've been doing all of those sorts of things very similarly. We've been thinking about new ways to interact with our members. We've got many of our members who are out of work. We've got many of our members who are at home in isolation. There is many anxieties that come with that, many mental illness, mental health issues that come with isolation. So we are supporting our members to be able to have more interaction with us, more dialogue with us because of those things as well. I might just touch before we moved on, because you talked about the AGM, the digital AGM, and there was a great question on, you know, how do you do it? What will change? And the Governance Institute of Australia last Friday held our AGM digitally. So our first digital AGM. And so I can share some of the learnings from that. You know, there's two parts to the AGM. There is what I'd call the content part of the AGM. And really that just requires business as usual, but with some careful thinking about the intent of why you're trying to do what you're trying to do. So if the intent is to allow for questions from the members to interrogate and hold the board accountable, how do you do that in the best way possible? Do you do it just by written questions? Can you allow people to phone those questions in? How do you curate those questions? So there's the matter of managing the content, providing a transcript of the meeting afterwards. But then the other side of it is the operations side of it. And of course, holding a virtual meeting requires a stable platform. It requires strong internet connection from people's homes. It requires a whole range of operational detail, and that all needs to run right. And I would say we had a number of technical difficulties with our AGM. You know, no particular fault of ours. We had a communication complication with our provider, and they did a major server upgrade a half an hour before our AGM, and lost the capacity to hold our AGM because of an unexpected upgrade. So really clear communication with your provider about the importance of the meeting, and do a trial run. Practice, practice, practice. It's the first time we are in an environment where so many of us are doing so many things for the first time. And Mary talked about having engaged your board members to teach them how to use the technology. Do a practice run, be patient, and allow yourself to be patient with yourself as well. We are going to make mistakes. Things will not go perfectly. We are doing lots of things for the first time. And we need to persevere and learn and improve rather than get frustrated.
Can I just jump in and agree with you on that? I mean, the training thing is absolutely important, critical, particularly for those who haven't dealt with it very much recently. We had one company who were running their first virtual board meeting. The company secretary had an interesting bit of minuting to do, where one member of the board left his mute, or forgot to put his mute button on. Personally, I'm much more used to leaving my mute button on when I'm trying to talk, but one member of the board didn't have his mute button on at the right moment when he was saying, and I'll paraphrase slightly, what a silly comment had been made by another board member. That led to some interesting moments. So yeah, it's training, it's making sure people think about things. If you were in a room, you'd know not to say that, but you know, online you might not.
Thanks, Bill. So I think we learned the 3 C's are communicate, 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 and then the 3 P's would be practice, practice, and practice. So just to stick to time, if you can just give it in 2 minutes what y'all are doing there in India to help governance professionals, followed by Bentley. If we can have just in 2 minutes what differently are you all doing?
In India, we have made from the institute side, I'll rather suggest and request everyone of their respective institute that analyze the provision of the respective corporate laws and companies act and make the representation to respective authority to relax the rules. We have done it in India, and Ministry of Corporate Affairs and SEBI, Secretaries Exchange Board of India, they both have relaxed the provision to the large extent for the purpose of ease of doing of business in India. So I think the key word is that you be professional as a company secretary, as a governance professional, are very well aware about the difficulties faced by the corporates, faced by the board of directors, and faced by the, on the large basis, the professionals as whole. So we should analyze those provisions and represent to the government for making the relaxations, and definitely all the government during this pandemic and COVID-19 will relax the provisions. Second thing, as far as knowledge is concerned and practice is concerned, hold maximum webinars, and this is really a very fruitful webinar. I must compliment the organizers to give the opportunity for across the world, whole of the world, to come together and analyze the provisions and make the other countries aware about what is happening in the other part of the world.
Thank you, Ashish. I think that was the whole part. The whole objective was how can we share across best practices across globe so everyone can learn. So thank you, Ashish. Bentley, can we just have in few words what different are you doing in Sri Lanka to assist this?
The changes that have come so quickly, I think, have been handled very well by the company secretaries, particularly change in the meeting, the style of meetings. It has gone virtual now. And I'm proud to say that most of these companies that are having them are having professionals from our institute. And it has been a challenge to them. And I must say that the training they've had has been held them in good stead. Their understanding and knowledge of board dynamics, of risk management, strategy, accounting, the law, and for them to have advised their boards. I know many boards have had the advice of the company secretaries who have been chartered governance professionals, and there are also the other professions who are company secretaries, but the few we have done pretty well, and I'm proud to say that they have done a great job, and I do hope that we'll have more professionals joining our ranks we have a fast track which gives any member who is a company secretary for 5 years or any of those roles. They can come on the fast track and become a member of our institute by just doing 2 modules. And I think it's great to have people like that with us.
Thank you, Bentley. I think I'll just quickly answer the second part of the question. What has BoardPAC done post-COVID? I think having understood globally, board meetings must undertake and must happen for proper governance as a commitment. BoardPAC actually announced that to provide free video-enabled conference access and free BoardPAC usage for corporates which had not been digitized prior. So we did that until 31st May. Having seen the global demand for more, I think BoardPAC recently also extended until the 30th of June, providing free video conference access and free BoardPAC usage to make sure smooth transition, because I think globally we all need to comply, we need to support each other, we need to sustain the corporate success. So I think that's from BoardPAC's point of view. I think final question I would like to ask Rahu is how to get the accounts audited from the auditor if the pandemic situation as physical presence of auditor is not possible. Okay, so it's wrong. Let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase the correct term. It should be how can you get audited accounts if the physical auditor is not present? Can it be done?
It's possible. Because all this while also when they come to do the auditing, we did give a physical document also, but they also required the soft copy from us. So I think there's no problem, and we can change to that also.
Thank you, Rohit. And I said in the start, as governance professionals, also as professionals, we need to stick to limited time. So a big thank you to our panelists who provided a valuable input and context into the new norm in corporate governance. The question I will leave the audience today is COVID-19 a constraint or opportunity for corporate governance? Thank you on behalf of the board, on behalf of BoardPAC and the Chartered Governance Institute, to all the webinar participants who joined us across 30 countries. As I always say, don't hope for change, change for hope. Be safe and thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a safe time.
Yes, everybody stay safe.